Hi, this is Subfocus. We're going to make a nasty synth bass for you right now. Okay, starting off with, I'm going to be using Massive. And we're starting off with just a basic saw wave. The first thing I'm going to do is put the unison up to 3 and basically detune it so it sounds wider. So think of it as there's the basic sounds like that, and then we're spreading several other saw waves around it, detuned to make it sound fatter. So put it to about there. So that's our basic sound. Now I'm going to put a notch filter on it here to get kind of bit of like subtle kind of phasey movement to it, and we're going to use the performance LFOs, which basically allow you to do more complex patterns than normal LFOs. Like a normal LFO, you'd have just you'd have a basic sine wave modulating the filter, whereas with this you can have these complex steps which I've already set up to get the sound really moving. So I've already routed that to a bandpass filter. So once that's on, get the sound really moving around. There's also some glide on there, and it's monophonic with glide, so you can press 2 notes at a time and it will glide between the sounds. Right, and to flavour it up a little bit, I've also got some distortion on it from the effects section, and I've also put another distortion on the effects on an insert in the routing here. So this is pretty much my finished patch. Oh, actually, and there's also another oscillator here to give it a bit more bite. It's one of the digital oscillators called Scrapyard on Massive, so you get that kind of extra growl to it. And you can kind of change the flavour of that by moving the position of the waves. So that's a really sort of resonant sound, and then that's sort of slightly different sounding growl there. And you can sort of change the amount of movement on the sound by varying the amount here, or changing the amplitude of the LFOs. Changing the bandwidth kind of takes it from being quite thin to more full on sort of Reese type sound. So here's a little pattern I've got for it. Right, here I'm just going to sort of do a basic walkthrough of like a simple lead patch. So these type of sounds you get used a lot in drum and bass, where they're kind of it's basically a really simple sound. It's a saw wave, again put through unison. So it's basically a detuned saw wave, and by doing that you kind of get this kind of bigger sound to it. So firstly I'm going to just turn up the unison C3 and Massive, and basically make sure it's centered as well. So all the other saw waves are kind of centered around the one basic note. then I'm going to spread it out so it's a bit wider sounding now. And yeah, basically just put a delay on it. I'm just using the inbuilt massive delay, and I'm going to put a little bit of wider on it stereo wise as well. And what else am I going to do? There's also you can put a bit of, I usually put a bit of like high pass modulation on sounds like this, just to get a tiny bit of variation in tone in the sound as the kind of riff goes on. So I'm going to put this high pass on, routed to basically a slow LFO, and you kind of get a subtle sort of movement on it, and that's basically it. There's lots of other things you can do to it if you kind of go for the notch. It's a bit more of a kind of tackier sound, but I'm just going to keep it with the high pass. So that's it, I guess. Right, this is I'm just going to do a bit about sub bass as well. Now, one of the most important things about the sub is it generally should be in mono. Basically, I've got a really simple sub bass patch here in Zeta, which is it's just a sine wave. I've got like sort of the option of putting a little bit of like an LFO to the pitch on it, so it slightly fluctuates in pitch. One trick I do as well a lot is have very small glides in the beginning of sub bass notes, so that they kind of, I'll just exaggerate a bit here, so you kind of get a little bit of a push off in the start of the note. So it's almost like a kick, but you can kind of, it tends to like, it's you know, it's not a fail safe, but sometimes you do get a really nice kind of push off on the note by doing that. But essentially sub bass is really simple. There's not a lot, you don't really have a lot of flexibility with it, aside from the basic pitch of the note. I mean, generally with drum and bass stuff, there's always a sine wave sub bass underneath everything else, and kind of you end up taking bass sounds like the LFO bass that I was using earlier, and layering them together and basically just taking out some of the low end of the more mid-rangey sound to make space for the sine wave. Think like it works in different ways from other forms of dance music. Like generally in sort of house music, you get the kick a lot lower, whereas in drum and bass you have the sub bass is like the lowest element most of the time. To kind of make space for the frequencies, you generally have your kicks within the rhythm higher, and also the trend is now to sort of have very low endy snares. Like this here's a loop I put together earlier. Yeah, basically you kind of you end up sort of EQing into the hits, kind of getting them to sit in the right ranges, and actually changing the pitch of the hits as well to kind of make them fit in the right brackets. So here the snares, like I basically, when I'm putting beats together, I use frequency analyzers a lot. So I will I'll take that break and put it into Waveler real quick. Just show you what I mean. So here you've got the bounce beat. This is a beat sort of, it's probably about 10 layers of different sounds or so, and you can see on the spectrum you can see where all the you can see where all the hits are actually hitting. So like generally the snare is kind of coming around between sort of 150 and 200 hertz. That's the kind of standard for a lot of drum and bass now. Although it's not, it's not the rule. And the kicks generally sort of hitting around sort of 80 to 100 rather than lower than that. Often I'll take a tiny bit of lows out of my kicks with EQ, just to make a tiny bit of space for the sub. Or sometimes I won't. As I say, it's not. These aren't hard and fast rules. It's just the way that tunes do tend to sound these days. Those are kind of ranges at which all the hits are hitting in. So yeah, this is a beat recently put together in Cubase. I just thought I'd walk you guys through a few of the elements that make up the beat. Basically, I do all my beats in audio, so these are all just chopped up audio files I've actually chopped up within Cubase, and basically my sound, especially with the beats, it's all about layering really. Here I'll go through some of the layers with you guys. So there's this break, which is like it's like a classical break. That's for some of the shuffle and some of the sort of flavour to the loop. And I've also got an amen in there, which is this loop. Notice that the snares are taken out to kind of make space for the main snare. And those are sort of to give the kind of groove of the loop. And right, next I've got the main kick layer. This is just it's one of many sort of pre-prepared hits that I've done. In addition to that, I've got a slightly sort of EQ'd out at lower volume ghost kick running. So it just adds like slightly more kind of interest to the rhythm again. And that's also layered this kick here. So those are all the kicks. And then I've got my snare layers, and this is like, so here's like, this is quite a wide sort of splashy sounding snare. I've got this, which is more of an attacky kind of high snare to give a bit of like bite on the front of the snare, and then got the main snare, which is here, and that snare is again one of the ones I've sort of pre-prepared. Basically, the secret to it is boosting the low end of it, so say around 200 hertz for example. It will vary according to what snare you're actually using. And it's quite long, and sometimes once I've kind of EQ'd that in, I'll do a bit of compression afterwards to kind of rein in what I've boosted into it. But it's all about EQ boosting really, in order to kind of get it to sit in that sort of low end area, so that when you hear it in the club, it kind of really punches through. It's not just sitting up there in the treble, it's kind of quite, it makes the beat sound really, really full as well. In addition to that, I've got a couple of those snares ghosted, just to add to the shuffle. So, and then I've got a bunch of hi-hat layers as well. I've got this beat here, which is just a really splashy, simple break, kind of just add sizzle on top of the loop. Got some hats with that as well, also sort of sizzly, and then some more like rhythmic ones on 16s. Some loop. I've got a little shuffle pattern here as well. Like some of these are quite wide as well, just to kind of basically the higher up the sort of frequency spectrum you go, I generally have the sound slightly wider. So not necessarily pan, but just have sounds that aren't totally mono. Whereas like all the lower sounds, even though they are actually stereo waves, are basically essentially mono. Like if we bring up the snare, it's basically it's the same on both sides. So I've got, and then like going back to the snare, there's some higher layers which are slightly wider, but then they're not. There's none of the low frequency stuff is going on there. It's all the high stuff. So together it sounds like this. guess that's about it.